All right, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our work session of the Wake County Board of Education. It is approximately 4 o'clock, 4:01. So we will get started. Again, good afternoon to everyone. It's a beautiful afternoon out, so I hope everyone had a chance to get out and enjoy some of the weather before we get started into what looks like a pretty healthy agenda for both our work session and meeting tonight. So lots to do and lots to cover. First up on the item on the agenda, co-curricular athletics planning. Before we get started, Superintendent Moore, do you want to say anything as we get started, kick off? If not, I'll kick it right over to Drew Cook. I'll be with us. Drew, we'll get started. Drew Cook, and he'll introduce Mr. Fitz and Mr. Cook. Good afternoon, Mr. Cook.
Yes, sir, and good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and members of the board. We do appreciate the opportunity to be with the board this afternoon to provide an update and an overview on our district's plans for a phased return to co-curricular and extracurricular student activities this fall, with a specific focus today on high school athletics. We, of course, recognize and acknowledge the critical importance of these programs and activities, each of which we see as an extension of the regular classroom environment, and we look forward to sharing and discussing the details of our planning with you this afternoon. So here with us today to lead you through the presentation and discussion is Mr. Eric Fitz, Senior Director of Middle School Programs, and also Mr. Darren Coe, the Wake County Public School System Director of Athletics. So with that introduction at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fitz.
Thank you, Mr. Good afternoon, Board Chair Sutton, Vice Chair Cash, and other members of the Wake County School Board. It is our pleasure to be with you to share some information about work being conducted with the Co-Curricular and Athletics Subcommittee that was created in June of 2020. Now, this subcommittee has been meeting weekly since June and has been providing guidance for schools and the community since then. We will also continue to meet on an as-needed basis, and we will proceed with guidance for schools and recommendations to senior leadership to consider as it relates to the engagement of students in co-curricular activities and athletics. I wanted to share with you what we had in mind when creating the scope of the work of this subcommittee. We needed to devise a communication plan to inform stakeholders of the recommendations for co-curricular activities and athletics decisions for school-based staff, such as principals, athletic directors, arts directors, club advisors, and sponsors. We needed to develop health plans for schools, develop professional learning for athletic directors and coaches, and even produce guidance documents that would outline protocols for safely implementing co-curricular activities that align with district and state guidelines. Last, we had cohesive plans and guidance documents that outline protocols for safely implementing athletic activities that align to district and state guidelines. Our work and many of our deliverables were also supported by the guidelines that were developed from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Public Instruction's guidebook for reopening schools. Now, as you've seen this image before, this subcommittee works along with many other committees that report to the Tiered Instruction Steering Committee, which is also connected to the Reopening Core Team. This subcommittee has many stakeholders that are involved in this work. Some school-based personnel, such as principals at the middle school and high school levels, athletic directors at the middle school and high school levels, a band director and an athletic trainer at the high school level, and we have some central services-based staff as well, such as area superintendents, representation from the Office of Equity Affairs, custodial services, risk management, and other departments. Within this subcommittee of co-curricular activities and athletics, we have 3 small groups that also meet and work towards meeting our desired outcomes. We have the Arts and Band small group that is led by Freddie Lee Heath, our Director of Arts. We have our co-curricular small group that is led by Joanne Honeycutt, Director of Career Tech Education. And we have the athletic small group that is led by Darren Cole, Director of Athletics. Now, the purposes of today's meeting will be focused on the work, plans, and guidance around optional and off-season workouts that has been developed by the athletic small group. With this slide, you'll see the following that is just a snapshot of some of the statements and guidance that this subcommittee has shared over the summer. Communications sent to families in June and July about the updates regarding indefinite suspensions for athletics. Guidance was shared in August with school-based leaders about co-curricular activities and student government elections. Guidance was also shared at the school level and the community about band competitions being suspended for the fall season. This team has also worked on guidance documents for schools to utilize, emphasizing the 3 W's, safety protocols, wearing a mask, waiting 6 feet, and washing hands, recommendations for workloads with the advisors and sponsors, and ensuring that we are in compliance with guidance from the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, while all of these groups work under one umbrella, the arts and bands, the co-curricular, and athletics, we wanted to bring information specific to guidance and recommendations that we've made for athletics for the upcoming seasons. The release of the timeline and calendar from the North Carolina High School Athletic Association has allowed the athletics group to leverage that information and then develop a proposal and a calendar for optional workouts and tryouts for each competitive sport this school year. After review of the proposal, the subcommittee and the other stakeholders felt this plan would be in the best interest for our student athletes, coaches, and schools given our present state while in this pandemic. The proposed calendar will be shared a bit later in this presentation. I also want to mention that middle school athletics are also a part of the conversation with this athletics group. However, our school system is able to determine if and when we will return to athletics at that level, as we control the calendar for the sports that will be played, and we also create the schedules for each team that participates in the district at the district level. We will have a better indication on how we can roll out middle school athletics based on how well things progress with high school athletics. We will now have Darren Cole lead you through the specific information developed by the athletics group to get our students back on the fields, the tracks, and courts of competition.
Good afternoon. What I'm sharing with you today is information directly from the North Carolina High School Athletic Association Skill Development Guidelines, which identifies requirements for member schools to follow during optional off-season workouts for student athletes. After reviewing some of the main points of these guidelines, I will share a recommendation of a phased-in approach to resume athletic participation for Wake County Public School System high school student athletes. While reviewing the NCHSAA skill development guidelines, which are linked above, you may notice some differences between the NCHSAA guidelines and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Service guidelines, such as a recommendation under high school athletic associations to wear face covering, while the Department of Health and Human Services requires that we wear face coverings while not actively engaged in athletic activity. We will follow the more restrictive guidelines to ensure safety and compliance with state guidelines at all times. Protecting the safety and health of all student athletes and coaches is the primary guiding principle and a key reason as to why we have waited until today to bring forward a plan to resume athletic activity during this global pandemic. We understand that it is essential to the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of students to return to physical activity in as safe a manner as possible, which is the basis of our plan. Wake County Public School System staff will follow the NCHSAA guidelines and DHHS guidelines and implement procedures for screening individuals prior to participating in workouts and follow all local and state guidelines when handling possible exposures or symptoms related to COVID-19. The pre-workout monitoring will include a daily screening, temperature checks for all student athletes and coaches and other adults who may be engaged in activities, screening questions answered by all participants prior to their first day of participation, and coaches or designees responsible for collection of data from those screenings. Individuals with positive screenings must provide a note from a healthcare provider upon return. If a person on a team tests positive for COVID-19, all members of that pod who had close contact would have to quarantine for 14 days from exposure, check their temperature twice a day, and watch for symptoms. All attendees should follow the 3 W's: wear a face covering, wait 6 feet apart, and wash hands regularly. Coaches and other supervising adults will be required to wear a face covering at all times. Student athletes will be required to wear face coverings when entering and exiting the facilities and when not actively engaged in athletic activity. Individuals with a COVID exposure within the past 14 days will not be able to participate. Individuals with signs or symptoms must not participate. Athletic directors, athletic trainers, and school administrators must work together to develop site-specific plans for screening all participants, clearly marking all entrances and exits to facilities to minimize exposure opportunities. Schools will be provided with the necessary supplies and work with custodial services regarding cleaning and disinfection of facilities. Schools will collect the required pre-participation COVID screening form from all participants prior to their first day of participation. Additionally, all student athletes will be required to submit an updated medical history form for the 2020-21 school year, along with a current athletic physical. If a student athlete tests positive for COVID-19, they shall report that information to the coach, athletic director, or athletic trainer, who will immediately report to the school principal so that the principal can contact health services. All schools will be required to follow the guidelines before permitting a student athlete to return to participation. It's important to understand that at no time is a coach required to hold off-season skill development or workouts. Additionally, at no time may a coach require any student athlete to participate in off-season skill development workouts or workout sessions as a measure of continued participation or selection of a team. These workouts are strictly voluntary for coaches and for student athletes. All sessions will be limited to a maximum of 90 minutes per day per student athlete. Based on current state guidelines, outdoor sessions will be capped at a maximum of 50 individuals per facility or 25 individuals when indoors per group, which includes all coaches and student athletes. At this time, all weight rooms and locker rooms will remain closed. Over the past several months, the Co-Curricular and Athletics Committee, which has principal, area superintendent, athletic director, athletic trainer, fine arts, CTE, and other central services staff representation, has been meeting to discuss when and how to appropriately resume activity. With the release of an athletic calendar from the NCHSAA, we now feel that with target dates for athletic seasons, it's an appropriate time to return to optional off-season participation. This document and timeline was created based on feedback from these groups and is supported by consensus of the 24 Wake County Public School System high school athletic directors. It's been reviewed and supported by the athletic subcommittee of the co-curricular team, the full co-curricular and athletics team, and the reopening core team. You will notice from the document that this is a phased-in, measured approach to begin athletics that creates a pathway for all sports supported by the NCHSAA calendar to begin participation in order of the official season start dates as determined by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. On the calendar, in the first column, date of return, is the first day that each sport could begin optional off-season workouts, a maximum of 2 days per week. The live period start in column 3 is approximately 1 month prior to the official start date for tryouts. During the live period, each sport could hold optional workouts up to 5 days a week on weekdays, avoiding holiday breaks. For a minimum of the first 2 weeks, all workouts will take place on campus only to familiarize all with the required screenings and safety measures and to ensure they are being adhered to. The season start date is the first official day of tryouts for each sport as determined by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. The NCHSAA sports calendar is linked at the bottom of the page for your review as well. Thank you.
So in summary, or before closing, I want to share a few highlights from the band and the arts and the other co-curricular activities. The arts team, is working towards a return to practice as well. The plan for the arts is to closely follow athletics as much as possible regarding check-ins, temperature checks, wearing masks, limited building access, remaining outside initially, being socially distanced, and remaining in pods. Much of this work has already been outlined in the arts COVID document. They have established a teacher work group to formulate language that will be added to the arts COVID document. And once completed, it will be screened internally, and our director of arts will then be able to share that with the subcommittee and then also senior leadership. The arts and bands have information from state and national organizations that provide information to support their work and provide guidance and suggestions for the schools. The arts group wants to provide guidance and recommendations that will meet state and local guidelines and support the schools with being prepared for when schools can provide opportunities for student participation. At the school level, the athletic director and the arts department chair will work together on the placement for practices and for rehearsals. If planned carefully, field use should not be a problem. However, some thought around student traffic patterns and congregating will need to be worked through for each school. For other groups, like those in career technical education, the team is working on how to engage students in courses that require skill instruction, such as fire, EMT, nurse aid, construction, automotive, and collision. Once we're able to start getting students on site for other activities, these opportunities will also be made available for those students. Again, finalization of these guidelines is still in the works. In review, this is a soft rollout, and it allows us to learn from the experiences from the first teams in October. If things go well, if things are manageable, it allows us to effectively prepare for the start of other sports throughout the athletic seasons. Our plan is in alignment to the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. This is a statewide explicit guidance and parameters that we believe are appropriate and as safe as possible for our student athletes and coaches. This calendar is our best effort to get to the field, the course, and the track of play. And this is based on the current information that we have right now. We don't want to come out of the gate going 0 to 100 miles per hour as if things are normal, because they simply are not. We're moving at a pace that will allow for flexibility and adjustments that may be needed to ensure we're being as safe as possible. This pace allows us to learn and grow through this process and through the seasons. We are really trying to strike the balance for the social emotional needs of kids and still have a safe return to competition. All in all, we want to be safe as possible and keep our kids healthy. We thank you for your time this afternoon, and we are open to responding to any questions that you may have.
So thank you, Mr. Fitz, Mr. Coe, for presenting this plan and this information. We certainly appreciate the thoughtfulness as well as the caution in the development of this plan. And like you all are, I'm sure that all are optimistic that things will go well, and we look forward to the safe and healthy return. I've got several questions from board members. So I'll start in the order in which I saw the hands. Mr. Hegarty, you're up first. How are you this afternoon?
I'm doing well, Mr. Sutton. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Doing well. So, Mr. Fitz, Mr. Coe, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate all the hard work that went into this proposal, and that I know it was the work of a lot of individuals coming together, especially our athletic directors, and it required a lot of coordination. I want to applaud you on your efforts, and I think this is a responsible plan. I think it addresses some important health and social emotional needs of our students. I think you have laid out a realistic plan that doesn't try to achieve too much, but has very responsible benchmarks and measurables so that we can get those students back out in the fresh air and try to restore a little bit of something that they hold very, very special. So I support these efforts. I support this plan. And again, I want to thank you all for all of your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hegarty. Good afternoon, Mrs. Scott. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you to Mr. Coe and Mr. Fitz as well. I do appreciate the work that you've been following closely, the guidance issued from the state and working hard. We all know how valuable team sports is for the mental health of our students and for the coaches too, who really want to get back working with their kids again. I do wonder, my first question is, where can parents access this calendar that was shared? I'm sorry, I closed my window with the page that has sort of the guideline that we're aiming toward.
So, Ms. Scott, thank you very much. This will be shared by the communications team later this evening, I understand, in an email to parents of high school students.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then the other question I had for band returning, I know that, and particularly when we look to return into the building safely at some point, as we're talking about those plans later on in this this work session in the board meeting. I know, has there been discussion with these teachers on using the different types of like bags around the bells of instruments? Do you know, can anyone address that answer for the instruments to sort of filter the air?
That's a great question, Ms. Scott. I do believe that we do have Mr. Fraley Heath that would be on the call, and he may be able to answer that specifically as it relates to the arts and bands. Know that he is leading that that group.
And he is on the call.
I can jump in and add some information as well. Good afternoon, Ms. Scott. So I do know the North Carolina Bandmasters Association has put out quite a bit of information, as you referenced, for some guidelines for bands to follow, such as wearing masks with a small slit in them for the mouthpiece, and then bell covers. Things like, instead of emptying water valves inside, they should be emptied outside, or if they are inside, they should use things like puppy pads maybe to absorb the water. Obviously, rehearsals should be kept at a minimum of 25 or less, and while inside a building, they recommend no more than 30 minutes of a rehearsal, so that that there's time for air circulation. But they recommend that most rehearsals take place outside, if at all possible, particularly in the fall. So they have put out some guidelines like what you mentioned.
Perfect. And do we have an estimate time frame for when parents of band and other fine arts students can expect to see a similar calendar proposal that sort of is close to what our parents will be receiving later today for athletics?
We don't have that today, but certainly we can look at coming back with something like that in the future. Perfect.
Thank you. And I appreciate that it was also highlighted about some of our CTE courses. I know our FFA clubs are also there, often being outdoors in a lot of the work that they do. So I know there are a lot of groups that are excited to have plans to safely get back to what they've been doing. And those were my questions. Thank you so much to everyone for your work. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And just to share, Ms. Scott, Freddie Lee was on the call, but he was having some technical difficulties. He did want to respond directly to you, but he'll be crafting a response for you, okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Scott. Good afternoon, Mrs. Cash.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And thank you, everyone that is presenting this today. I appreciate that. I know our athletes, a lot of our high school athletes have been participating in other teams across the county and across the state. So I know they and their coaches will be really glad to be back together so that they can be part of the high school team in addition. So I do want to thank you for getting this rolled out rather quickly. I did have one quick question, and it may have more to do with human resources. When because of the fact that these seasons might be starting, will our coaches receive the stipend or the extra duty pay that goes along with the season opening. I know that some of them possibly were trying to decide whether they would have to do maybe a different job, a second job. I just wondered if this would help them get their stipends.
Ms. Cash, I'm on the call and I can field that if it's okay.
Sure.
Yes, the HR group has guidance sort of in the finalization pipeline right now. We should be able to get that out sometime this week as we also roll this information out. But the intent is to be able to pay stipends for coaches who obviously do coach for the season, even if that season might be a little abbreviated than normal.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cash. Good afternoon, Dr. Martin. You're up next.
Thank you. I too want to add my thanks and appreciation to the team who's been working on this. It is a very important work. A couple questions. One, in terms of language, and this is back on your slide 7, you noted regarding quarantining. I'm just a little curious about the language should as opposed to shall. Basically, you're suggesting that if a person on the team tests positive, all members of the pod who had close contact should quarantine for 14 days. It feels to me like that ought to be a requirement that we have. Rather, should feels a little bit too soft of language. And I'm curious as to the choice of should versus shall.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. So we are working in alignment with the High School Athletic Association, NDHHS, and Kelly Creech and the Health Services team is involved as well. I do know that the High School Athletic Association's guidelines, if you're grouped in a pod and if all of our procedures are followed appropriately, you would not be in close contact with somebody to have been considered exposed. So you would not have been within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, which is what exposure is considered exposure now. So only if you are considered to have been exposed to somebody who has tested positive for COVID-19 would you have to quarantine for those 14 days. So therefore, if we are following our guidelines appropriately and we are not within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, individuals in those pods should not have to quarantine because they would not have been exposed. We're working through that language, and Ms. Creech and I will finalize all of that information and make sure it is clear and concise when submitted to the schools for implementation.
Okay, and I appreciate that clarification. I think this is just really, really critical because we've already, I mean, even at the early parts of the shutdown, we heard reports of people who just weren't paying attention to guidance. We hear reports right now that not all of our staff is paying attention to guidelines. And I think it is really critical because we clearly want to open up, but it will be easy to create a problem so that everything has to shut down if people aren't careful. So this is just like every other safety precaution. You put it in place hoping you never need to use it, but it's there in case you do. And so that's where, I just think it's critical for particularly anybody starting sports early. You got a higher responsibility than everybody else. Everybody's got high responsibility, but a little bit of carelessness can shut down the program for everybody, which we don't want. And that's why I just want to make sure that our guidance is absolutely clear. That's the should, shall. Let's be really careful about that. So I appreciate the work on that. Somewhat related to that, I have to wonder, and this even goes somewhat broadly for all of school reopening, but I think we need to start with the athletics, and that's the question of, is there a way that we can work with the county health department to increase testing? As I look at the literature, the congregate gatherings that have opened up successfully generally have a pretty good testing protocol to be proactive in assessment. Waiting till you have a temperature that's above 100.4 is kind of too late, because by the time you're showing a temperature, you've been infectious usually for several days. And so the places that have had the greatest success are those where they have some periodic random testing to make sure that you catch things early. So I just wonder, particularly those participating in athletics is a subset of our total school population. It just feels to me like there could be some wisdom if we could build a partnership with the county health department to, have, every athlete participating in a program be, just have, rotating groups, but so maybe a third get tested every week or something like that. Could we work towards some kind of a better testing protocol? Because I think that increases our chance of being successful.
Dr. Martin, I'll be happy to follow up with the county manager on that idea.
I'd appreciate that, because like I say, I want us to be successful, and I don't want us to sort of, just taking temperatures, I think is too late for dealing with infection. So whatever we can do to be successful is what we need to try to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Mr. Fletcher, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I too want to express my support for this plan. There are a couple of student groups that haven't been mentioned today, and you could think that band would also include marching band and color guard. I want to verify that those variations of that effort are included in the arts recommendations that are coming. And then not mentioned at all are our ROTC groups that are in at least a third of our high schools that have competitions, drill, etc. And where do they fit in this hierarchy of reassembling and being able to participate, and what counts as a PE credit for them as part of their academic participation? But where are those groups in our planning and thinking in terms of getting them re-engaged and having particularly the ROTC groups be able to reassemble?
Mr. Fletcher, they are involved in all of our co-curricular meetings. I did not mention those names specifically, but they are a part of the work from our arts and bands. All of those that you mentioned, as far as the color guard, the band, junior ROTC, they are included with the guidance that is being put together, sir.
I will add to Ms. Scott's encouragement to be able to publish a return to music, return to arts, return to ROTC schedule as soon as practical. I think our public, particularly our high school students, would be greatly appreciative. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Mrs. Kushner, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton. Thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate Mr. Coe and the team, Mr. Fitz, the clarity with which the Athletic Association has come to consensus with, and I assume this is with our neighboring districts, so that this is a consensus document across the region and state. So I applaud that work. And I would add to Mr. Fletcher where our middle school athletes and artists might fall. Is there a schedule when you might get more details for our middle school students interested in these similar activities?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. So we made the determination earlier in the year that middle school athletics would have they would have the opportunity for all of their athletic seasons, but they would be condensed into second semester. So we have the autonomy due to the lack of a high school athletic association for middle schools. There is some governance from the Department of Public Instruction, but we ultimately govern middle school athletics as a district ourselves. So we are working to develop a calendar to have all of our middle school sports seasons beginning when we return to second semester in January.
Okay, thank you. So some of those multi-sport athletes might have to pick and choose, but they will there be some overlap that they won't have to do that, or?
So the intent at the middle school level, since we control those calendars, unlike the NCHSAA calendars, we don't have autonomy in those calendars. I will do everything within my power to ensure that there is not overlap of seasons in middle school athletics. We never have overlap in season in middle school athletics in a typical year. So the seasons may be abbreviated similar to the high school athletic seasons, but we will work to assure that there is not overlap of those seasons so the students don't have to choose between sports.
Thank you. That's great news. Thank you, Mr. Coe.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Ms. Johnson-Hostler, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Sorry about the back and forth. My neighbor was cutting his yard and I was trying to not have noise in the back. So I think most of my questions were answered. The specific one was, I think what I heard you say, and Mr. Heath, you can chime in if I'm incorrect, or Dr. McFarland, that when Mr. Fletcher asked about color guard, I would imagine you said that's going to be all of our extracurriculars. So I want to double check and make sure that also includes our high school dance teams, which generally dance at both football and basketball season. If I hear silence, I'll go with that's a yes.
Yes, that is a yes. Everyone, all of our activities are included with this work.
Okay, and so I guess my question is, you answered Ms. Scott that you'll send a separate one. I'm asking because, like, actually it's listed like cheer. They do both basketball and football, so their start time distinguished for them as well. So on the spreadsheet, it says basketball and cheer, and dance is similar in that it does both basketball and football. So I guess I'm asking, will they get specifically a very similar live start period and season start time?
So I'll speak to that briefly. So there is a difference between cheer and dance teams. Dance teams are not governed under athletic departments. Dance teams are more co-curricular rather than extracurricular. So they are.
Sorry. Yep, that's why I asked Mr. Heath and Dr. McFarland.
I'm sorry.
But you can answer if you know.
So I'll just jump in, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, real quickly here. So while we haven't put out a specific schedule yet, I can tell you all the guidelines that I have seen for particularly like band or dance just require that, like the color guard, they only handle their equipment. They must stay, 6 feet apart. They must wear a mask. They can only drink out of their water bottles. Rehearsals are limited to, a 30 or 45-minute session. And I think we can assume that that would be sort of the consistent guidelines for all of those co-curricular activities. And then, of course, we would need to look at obviously some sort of schedule.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Coe, you didn't have to go off camera because the next question is for you.
Not a problem.
So you talked about, or I think Mr. Fitz did, about there not being crossover on the middle school calendar. I'm assuming you all have an answer about some of our schools where we have athletes that may play, say, basketball and football. And often for high school basketball, they go into playoff seasons. Do you already know if that will end before football starts?
So it will not. There is actually significant overlap of seasons at the high school level based on the calendar from the High School Athletic Association, including some differences in overlapping sports that are in seasons where they are not typically played in a traditional year. I understand that there is frustration, and I have shared some information with others regarding that. But that calendar, again, is dictated by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, and being that all of our high schools are members of the association, we are compelled to follow that calendar.
Yep, I completely understand. I just wasn't sure from here if we knew there'd be crossover. Thank you. I appreciate the support and work that all of you did to make this happen for our district. They're all ready to go back, including me, and I don't play a sport.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Does that complete your question?
Yes, it does, Mr. Sutton. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So again, thank you, Mr. Coe, Mr. Fitz, Mr. Cook, for that presentation and information, eagerly awaited information that I think for many I want to be clear both for the board and for the public. This calendar and this, what is proposed here in front of us, does not require board approval. So I want to make sure, oh, sorry, Ms. Mahaffey, you have a question?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I thought I had my hand up. It must have gone down. Thank you.
See it now, it came up. Go ahead.
So the screening data that we get from our artists and athletes that are coming through, does that go to Ms. Creech? Or how is that stored?
So we are working through the processes with the High School Athletic Association. Essentially, the screening process will be that of not a collection of documentation of the screenings, but either you have successfully completed the screening and passed and you do not show current symptoms and you're permitted into participation, or if you do not pass, for lack of a better term, the screening, we report it to the Department of Health and Human Services, and it is handled in that manner. So we are not collecting individual names daily other than keeping record of who attends.
Okay, and then the cost of the additional cleaning of, weight rooms and other facilities during practices and before and after games, that falls on the schools, not the booster clubs?
So I am working with custodial services and others to find ways to provide the sanitation or the disinfectant and other materials needed so that those costs are not pushed on the individual schools or the booster clubs, but we are still working through some of those details.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Coe, I am thankful that the High School Athletics Association was able to modify their schedule to accommodate our student athletes, but I have had concerns raised by some parents about the overlap of the schedules and students to choose one sport over another at the high school level. Specifically, I've been hearing mostly about football and lacrosse. Is there something that Wake County Public School System can do, has done to rectify that overlap? The concerns are not just about choosing which sport, but also field time and use of the fields.
So ultimately, again, we don't dictate that calendar and we have to work inside that calendar of the High School Athletic Association. I have shared some of those same concerns with leadership at the High School Athletic Association, and I understand that they have reviewed and looked at that information provided. I do know that we are asking our athletic directors to show grace and understanding when it comes to sharing student athletes, and that our coaches work together so that students aren't put in a position where they have to choose one sport or the other. There certainly will be difficulties with that scheduling for facilities and also for practices for individual teams, but ultimately it is our charge to principals and athletic directors to ensure that their coaches are working together in the best interest of all student athletes, not in the best interest of one individual sport.
And I did notice in the schedule that I had been sent that the overlap is not on games, but just as essentially the end of one athletic season and the start of a practice season. Is that correct?
With the link that was in the presentation today, it has the entire calendar. It invariably gives the start dates, and you'll look at playoff dates are not all listed. The season end date would be the beginning of the playoffs, and then the state championship dates are listed. There will be overlap between several sports, regular seasons. Additionally, there would be overlap between playoffs and championships and the beginning of other regular seasons. So there would be significant overlap across several sports.
Anything we can do to help the Athletic Association work through that, I would greatly appreciate that.
Understood.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Chair Sutton.
So if I could interject just a bit, Mr. Sutton, I do think that in all transparency, I serve on the board of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, and the process they have for when a sport, a group, the athletic directors of a school, a conference have a question or a concern, They do have a process where you submit that question or concern and it goes through a process. I think that's already happened with one aspect of a concern specifically expressed around the lacrosse season. And no action was taken on any changes there. But I think that understanding how to access the High School Athletic Association processes and submitting either as a group of coaches or as a conference, because it is the schools that are members of the High School Athletic Association, not really the district, it's each individual school, then when you sort of marshal how you want to express your concern, and normally that comes with a suggestion for a different way to do something or another option that can then be considered by the executive board of the High School Athletic Association, and it might go to a committee, and then it may eventually go to the full board. But they've got a process laid out, and our ADs are aware of it. So I think schools could work with athletic directors about how to do that.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Question, Superintendent Moore and Mr. Nieder, if you're on the question regarding cleaning, we know that booster clubs and PTAs are not all created equal. So I don't believe that the cleaning of facilities and things should fall on the booster clubs and PTAs. I'm assuming that the rest of the board would agree.
Right.
Are there funds or can we ensure that that cleaning does not fall on those groups, and that in the CARES funding or the funding that came from our county commissioners and the overall cleaning of the schools, that as these sports come on, that locker room facilities and that sort of thing would be included in that general cleaning?
So just two quick things. First, the district will provide the cleaning supplies that are needed for any spaces that are needed in our buildings or our athletic fields. Second, the current North Carolina High School Athletic Association guidelines do not allow the use of locker rooms or showers at this point. So we are not engaging in those at this time. At the time when that changes, obviously, those spaces will be put into the rotation as needed for cleaning.
Okay, sounds good. As I started earlier, this calendar does not require board approval. I just want to make sure that board members know, as we then finish this topic, this will become live.
About the number of
this calendar will be live and as it goes. So unless board members have any concerns or anything that you see, now is the time for that feedback, because after this will begin going out through our communications team to parents and athletes and coaches, and will be put out on the website and other methods. So any other concerns, feedback? Mrs. Cash, is that a residual hand, or do you have another question?
Yeah, I have I just wanted to ask this question to Mr. Coe. I'm assuming that because the ADs and the principals work really close together and have been waiting for this and looking forward to it, if we get questions from parents, I would assume we would just refer them back to the principal of that school, where the AD and a principal can answer the question.
Yes, the intent would be that they filter their questions to their school athletic director and principals.
Thank you, Mr. Coe.
Thank you, Mrs. Cash. And then Superintendent Moore and Mr. Blumberg, obviously the High School Athletic Association guidelines that are presented here would be sort of a minimum standard or floor. If we wanted to make these any more strenuous, and I'm just thinking about the question Dr. Martin had about the should versus the shall, are there any things in here that need to be included in any of our policies, or that might require an update in our policies regarding athletics? Again, I know most of these are COVID specific, and so probably don't require policy change. But is there anything that we need to be concerned about here before we leave this topic and these things go forward?
Well, I appreciate that Mr. Coe indicated that they were also tracking the guidelines from DHHS and that they would follow the more stringent requirements. So there are some instances where there's some differences between the North Carolina High School Athletic Association and DHHS. And my guidance, and I'm pleased to hear Darren say the same thing, is that we will follow the more stringent guidance. And so, throughout, my approach has been, and the district has been great with this, is we want to hug DHHS guidance. And that is, really our, the toolkit and what we should be doing. And yes, beyond the toolkit, the board could, the district could do even more. But the minimal amount and the critical amount is to follow DHHS. And again, I appreciate the fact that we'll follow whatever is more stringent.
Okay. All right. And I think with that being said, and also Superintendent Moore, I did hear a couple of board members stress that this might be shared as widely as possible and as soon as we can. So you and Mr. Simmons, I guess, will work to make sure that this is as widely distributed in as many outlets as possible.
There's a communication plan around it, so we'll follow up.
All right. Thank you so much for that. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton, certainly for chiming in about our high school booster clubs. There's certainly several that can't do that. So I want to acknowledge that I'm definitely getting a lot of dings right now. Appreciative of you making sure that will not, the cost of cleaning will not follow those boosters.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. All right. Moving to our next topic on the agenda is Board Policy 4700. This is related to student records. Dr. Gardner and Chief Technology Officer Marlo Gaddis, you're up.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity. We are here to present to you some proposed revisions to Board Policy 4700, student records. This policy speaks to allowing students in online courses access to video recordings of online class sessions. And we are bringing this to you in a work session today versus our typical policy committee that's several weeks out because of the time sensitivity of the policy in the remote learning environment in which we're operating. We have, given the context of this need, forward looking at these policy revisions today in the work session with the policy committee chair, Mrs. Kirshner, so that she is prepared as well to speak to this today while we're together. We have with us Technology Officer Marlo Gaddis, and we have Legal Counsel Neil Raimi to walk you through the revised changes that we are proposing today. This has been a collaborative work between the team and Technology Services and our Academic Advancement Office as we've looked at these revisions. And so in addition to Mrs. Gaddis and Mr. Raimi, we also have with us Julie Crane, as well as Crystal Reardon with us in case there are some other questions about the student records that you may have. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Gaddis to walk us through.
And I actually think, thank you, Dr. Gardner. I think actually Neil Raimi is going to kind of give us a quick overview of the why of the change, and then I'll step in with the changes.
Great, thank you, Marla. Board members, just as a brief framing of this issue for you, for starters, the purpose of this policy revision is very simple. It's to give students the ability to access legally access recorded online class sessions, whether they miss a class and want to catch up on what they missed, or just are reviewing and studying for an exam. The purpose is to give students the ability to do that consistent with FERPA, to actually go and review the class that they attended. And just as your quick legal background, for starters, if there's no recording of these classroom sessions, there is no FERPA issue. So there's not been a FERPA problem to date. I want to be clear on that because the sessions are not been recorded. There's no FERPA issue whatsoever. What we want to be able to do is say, let's have a routine procedure where the classroom sessions are recorded and they are accessible to students. And there's basically two ways that you can do that consistent with FERPA. One way is an opt-in approach. It's really essentially to require written parental consent of all parents in the class before the recording is even made. And as you can imagine, that's would impose a lot of practical difficulties. In fact, I think it's safe to say that's pretty much infeasible. It's not going to be a workable option across the district if you're requiring parental consent of every single parent for every single class. to even make the recording. So that led us to the other approach, which is an opt-out approach. On that approach, the recording is made. Parents do have an opt-out right, which I'll describe in a minute. But just so you know, this approach is a bit nuanced. It takes advantage of some 2008 amendments to the FERPA regulations. It used to be, you may be familiar with directory information, is the sort of information that is personally identifiable about a student, might be the student's name, a photograph, that sort of thing. But it's not particularly sensitive. It can include information like grades or IEP status or student discipline information. And you are allowed to designate information as directory information that does not require parental consent to share. Now, it used to be until 2008 that was an all or nothing designation. If you designate something as directory information, anyone in the world has a right to access it. Since 2008, you've had the ability, and we've tailored your policy accordingly, to limit the disclosures of directory information to certain categories of persons and for certain purposes. This policy revision takes advantage of both of those. It limits the disclosures of the recorded classroom activities to only students who are enrolled in the same online class, and it limits the purpose of the disclosures to instructional purposes. So it's not that students can say, I'm requesting on behalf of someone else to share with my friend, or my attorney or anything like that. It's really, it's purely for instructional purposes, and it's purely an access right of students in the same class. So that's how essentially it works. Marla can walk through it in a minute. I guess I want to say one more thing about, or maybe Marla, why don't I let you walk through the policy, and then we can talk about how we're going to implement the opt-out option as another.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Neil. So you should have an updated copy that Neil sent to you just before a work session that took into consideration some of the feedback from board members, specifically, I believe, Dr. Martin. And so I'm going to actually ask you to go ahead to page 12, and I'm actually showing it here. For those of you who want to follow along, you're welcome to. I'm sure we'll update it in Assembly as well. So what you'll first see here is exactly what Neil mentioned earlier, the idea that the disclosures of directory information may be made only to the categories of persons or organizations and for the purposes set out below. It is not a broad opting in for disclosures. This is specific to certain situations. And so that has been added at the bottom of page 12 to clearly spell that out. And then what you'll see if you go to page 14, I'm doing it slow so that nobody gets seasick as I'm scrolling. But you'll see at the top of page 14 the section that we have added that basically says that it may be disclosed upon request exclusively to other students enrolled in the same online or virtual class. As far as an audio video recording. And what that directory information includes. So if you can think about when you join a virtual meeting, your name is displayed, as you probably see both Neil and my names displayed. Those are displayed as you're in an online meeting. Also, our photograph or a pictorial representation. In Google Meet, it can just be our initial, but you also have the choice to have an avatar. You could have your own face, but that also becomes part of that information in the online or virtual class. Any audio or video recording, and this is the key piece we want to make sure that we've included, so that currently we have said that teachers should not be recording these sessions, and what this policy is going to allow our teachers to do now is to do exactly that, to record them. So any audio or video recording of a student that is participating, and then also any online chats or other recorded communications among the participants in the online class. As we all know, there are chats. When you record those chats, when you record the meetings, it also records the chats. And so that then also becomes part of that information. And then lastly, we have a couple notes here. Certainly opting out of disclosures of this directory can limit the extent, although we're going to talk a little bit about our workaround for that. to the extent of where you can participate, and we're trying to provide the best case scenario for students who need to opt out. And then the last piece is around protecting privacy of others and making sure you're not making your own recordings of an online or virtual class session. And so, Neil, do you have anything you want to add here?
Just briefly on those last two notes. First of all, thank you to Dr. Martin. For anything you see in yellow here is based on Dr. Martin's suggestions today. The adding the word exclusively just to really underscore this is a very limited disclosure. We're not saying any newspaper reporters can review online classes now. It's students enrolled in the same class exclusively. And then further down, the other yellow language was Dr. Martin's suggestion as well, which I kind of massaged into some legal language, that students and parents, this policy does not authorize anyone to make their own recordings. Now, I will say, as a practical reality, what happens, in someone's home is going to be a little bit outside of your practical control, right? But at least this policy is making clear we are not authorizing that, and we do not condone those recordings. And I would view that as this is not a FERPA issue per se, but I think it's a good thing to note here. To me, it's analogous to the, you could have the same rule in school, in a brick and mortar school. We do not allow unauthorized secret recordings of students in class, right? They're there for compulsory education. This is a public facility. You can't bring in a recording device and start, discreetly filming other students who are learning. So the same principle would apply in the online environment. So that's those are those yellow changes, and thank you to Dr. Martin for the suggestions. And then as to the first note, the practical limitations, Marlo can explain. We've had numerous discussions, and I think Marlo's come up with a very good strategy for how we can honor the opt-outs. I just want to be clear that the purpose of this note is that there's not a perfect solution here. This is not a case. There's certain limitations in these technological platforms. There's only so much we can do. So a student cannot be, if Marlo is a student and I can see her image and see her name right now, that's full participation. If her parent wants her to opt out and not be included in the video feed, we're going to have to come up with some solutions. Her name and image won't be displayed the same way. We'll have to have a workaround. So Marlo, you want to describe what you came up with there for the opt-outs?
Sure, and we'll be sending out directions to staff around this specifically, but we will be looking at a full recording of the class. However, enabling live stream for those classrooms to where a student would have a direct link to the class to watch, and then have some form either through Google Classroom or through Canvas chat where all the students are participating in a chat on the platform versus on the actual Google Meet platform, so that everybody's able to participate in the discussion. This will enable the student to watch but participate through a different platform that is not being recorded, and therefore is not an issue from the opt-out perspective. It won't be part of the recording. So that's the very quick version. I could get very technical, but I don't think that's necessarily what we need to do at this.
I think from my understanding, the key point in terms of somewhat limited participation is the students. We won't be able to display the students' image like the same way you all can see Marlo and me right now, and then be able to delete it from the recording. That just can't be done. So the student will be able to see and hear everything that's happening in the class, and will be able to speak and be heard. So there'll be full participation in that sense. The student's name and likeness can't be displayed. We just don't have a way to filter that out of the recording after the fact. Is that a correct summary?
Almost. No voice will be, but yes. Otherwise, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that is the changes to the policy. We welcome any questions at this time.
All right. See a couple of hands. Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and thank you, Ms. Gaddis and Mr. Raimi, for bringing this to us. I think what we've tried to do is find a balance so that students and teachers and families can access recordings while still putting these provisions in so we can protect student privacy. I really appreciate that we are fast tracking a policy so that if there is misuse, if there are instances where we see students not using these recordings properly, we'll have that policy in place to be able to address that, but also to impress upon our students that we're going to have policies in place that they have to respect each other's privacy. So thank you for bringing this to us, and we will be voting on this on first reading this evening, correct, Chair Sutton? And are we needing to waive second reading as well? So,
Yes, correct.
All right, thank you for that next step.
So just to extend that a little bit, Ms. Kirshner, there may be other questions, but since you did bring that point up, yes, our hope is to, once we hear your feedback and we answer your questions, if it is the favor of the board, we would take it as an action item tonight with first reading, waiver of second reading, so that we can get it in place for our students, as you said. So thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. And I just want to chime in to say thank you to Neil and Jonathan and Marlo and everybody who was involved in the revision. You have captured the concerns that I had. I live it myself, and I think this absolutely does capture the concern, because we do want students to be able to asynchronously review a class session, but we also need that level of protection. And as Neil, you noted, yeah, people may do a recording at home. We have no control over that. But as soon as anything's distributed, then we know that the policy has been violated.
Correct.
So I think you've captured the language effectively, and I appreciate that and support the revisions to this policy.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. All right, if there are no other questions, Dr. Gardner, Marlo, thank you for your work. Neil, thank you as well for your work. And again, as noted, this will be part of our action agenda tonight, seeking board approval on first reading and waiver of second.
Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Thank you. So at this time, this completes our work session agenda. We're finishing a little bit early, so if I can get someone to go to closed session, and if I could entertain a motion to go into closed session, we'll take some time to get a little bit of our closed session work done prior to the meeting.
Chair Sutton, do I need to have the guidelines for that session in front of me, go into closed session?
Yes, if you could, if it would be in the regular meeting agenda for the closed session motion.
I found it.
Thank
Chair
you.
Sutton, I make a motion that the board go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11, A1, A3, and A6, Melissa Senior versus WCPSS, number 19-045368, recommendations for administrative appointments, recommendations for employment, HR updates, workers' compensation. And to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve attorney-client privilege such as read in GS 143-318.11A3 due to current litigation BZ and by through his parents RZ and LZ, Wake County Board of Education 20 EDC 02627 to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11A3 to consider confidential student information protected under GS 115C-402 and the Family Educational and Privacy Rights Act 20 USC 1232G.
I second that.
Got a motion by Mrs. Mahaffey and a second by Mrs. Cash to go into closed session for the items just read and posted on our agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the roll call vote. Mrs. Cash?
Aye.
Mrs. Cash?
Aye.
Mrs. Kushner?
Aye.
Dr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Aye.
Ms. Mahaffey?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson Hostler?
Aye.
Mr. Fletcher?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So I have a unanimous vote to go into closed session. So if y'all would find your closed session links.
Chair Sutton?
Yes.
If you can, when you find that link, if you can just give us about 1 minute to get it open, because
yeah,
We were going to put it on the other side of the meeting, but we'll be ready in about 1 minute.
Okay, not a problem. So this adjourns our work session and we will go into closed session now. Thank you all.